The election was rigged. The 2020 election was rigged. We found that out. What you just said is just a piece of that. It's a big piece, but minor, relatively speaking, compared to what they did. They cheated in the election. They cheated on the vote. They cheated in every way possible, and it's the only way we got an incompetent man to be a president.
So Donald Trump can't get past his 2020 election loss, now with less than 7 months to go until the midterms, if you can believe it. Some of the same people who spread election denial conspiracies in 2020 are currently in place to oversee election security and infrastructure with the power to intervene or interfere. As the director of the Nonpartisan Campaign Legal Center tells ProPublica, quote, the election denial movement is now interwoven within the federal government, and they are working together toward a shared goal of reshaping elections. Joining us now, one of the ProPublica reporters who wrote that piece, Doug Bach-Clark. Doug, thanks for being with us. Your reporting has found that the guardrails that were in place in 2020 to thwart the president's impulses aren't in place any longer, and the people who tried to help overturn the election that year now have some key roles in government, could move the needle on this. So some of them call themselves Team America. Who are they? What power do they actually wield?
So as you know, we wanted to really take a deep look at what was happening inside the federal government. A lot of these guardrails, they held in 2020. They bent almost to the breaking point, but Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 election, they failed. But in the last year or so, the Trump administration has had a lot of time and a lot of opportunity to try to, overhaul the federal system, to get ready for the midterms. And we wanted to take a very deep look behind the scenes to see what was happening as they get ready for the midterms. Now, one of those key teams, as you mentioned, is a group of people at the Department of Homeland Security. They've called themselves in the past Team America internally, and some of their members come out of a group called the Election Integrity Network, which is led by a lawyer who tried to help overturn the 2020 election.
So is there any kind of effort to try to counter what these Trump appointees, his loyalists, are doing within the government?
Well, so, the Constitution dictates that states actually run elections. And one of the things we found as we looked at how the Trump administration was changing things behind the scenes was that a lot of both Republican state officials as well as Democratic state officials are really trying to stand up counter efforts by the Trump administration to impose their way of running elections on them. That can be Republican officials refusing to hand over voter rolls, which the Trump administration has sued them for. That can be Democratic state secretaries of states hiring more lawyers to try and fight what they believe is going to be a coming attempt to overturn potential results in the midterms.
So speaking of states trying to push back, the Secretary of State of Nevada addressed this very issue on Chris Jansing's Hour just a moment ago. Take a listen.
The Constitution is very clear that states have the responsibility to run their elections. What the federal government is doing, this administration is doing, is tearing apart that infrastructure because they want to influence and intimidate us into compliance with what they think is the appropriate thing to do.
So take us to the voter level of all of this for Americans who head to the polls in November. What could be different? What could they see there? What worries you after your research and reporting?
So one thing that the Trump administration has really tried to do is they released a new executive order at the end of last month, which would create sort of a master list of sorts of who could be eligible to vote. There's a lot of worries about, what the Trump administration might do to control about who could, show up at the polls, who would be able to do this. There's talk of ICE agents or other people showing up at the polls. The Trump administration has, said that the election is going to be free and fair. That's what they told us. But as we were looking behind the scenes, we found a lot of things that really broke down the old guardrails that prevented, partisan influence on elections. A really key moment that we found was when the Trump White House hired this lawyer named Kurt Olsen. Kurt Olsen tried to help Trump overturn the 2020 election in court, and Trump has hired him to reinvestigate the results of that election. Around the end of this year, Kurt Olson flew down to Georgia ahead of the raid to seize Georgia election materials. And, Olson met with the special agent in charge, the FBI special agent in charge there, and said, I have this report, we've got to, go and try and get these ballots. But the special agent in charge did not, go along with exactly what he wanted and was eventually asked to retire. Now, that's really a key moment. Back after Watergate, we established norms, we established rules that tried to prevent the White House from leaning on law enforcement. And, this seems to be a possible instance where that guardrail has broken down and is really an indication of what might be happening in the future as we get closer to the midterms.